Raffaele Cutolo, an astrological portrait by Ciro Discepolo. With the permission of the boss, the accountant, the young chief, the teller, and starting from my right and moving around the young men, I proceed to the third vote on Comrade Carmine. If before I knew him as a young man belonging and not belonging from this moment on, I know him as a young man belonging to this body of society. I embrace him in flesh, skin, and bone. I swear to share with him cent per cent and millesimo per millesimo, whether he fails or refails, or brings infamy upon himself and at the discharge of the society. This is the final part of what Giuseppe Marazzo, a courageous television journalist, defines as a romantic initiation ceremony. This text, reported above, is the criminal code used to enter the ranks of a career in the Camorra. The merits to gain entry are found in the applicant's genealogical record: a father or brother in prison, a murdered relative, or a prior record of robbery or extortion, or perhaps a marked and proven vocation for delinquency. At the head of this imposing holding company, which has now reached international dimensions, public opinion points to Raffaele Cutolo, born in Ottaviano on December 10, 1941 at 4:30 a.m. Incidentally, his has been the most difficult horoscope we have produced so far. Only after many efforts and attempts did we manage to obtain his complete birth data. We encountered no such insurmountable difficulties with the Pope, nor with President Pertini, nor with others. But who is Don Raffaele really? A man who commands the threads of a political economic empire from prison, who slaps prison directors, issues public threats, hands down death sentences, receives hundreds of letters of recommendation, and who until recently, in Ascoli Piceno, had transformed his cell into a luxury mini-residence with carpeting and piped music. Once again, astrology proves to be a true illuminating beacon that allows us to x-ray the soul of this infamously famous character. Raffaele Cutolo is a Sagittarius with a Scorpio ascendant and a Leo moon. Other characteristic traits of his birth chart are the Pluto dominance, ruler of the ascendant and conjunct the midheaven from the 9th house side, Mars in Aries in the 6th house trine the Sun, and the opposition axis of the 2nd and 8th houses, Sun-Mercury versus Jupiter, between Sagittarius and Gemini. Observing this birth chart, one cannot help but think of a determinism that orchestrates our entire lives, given to us by the overlapping layers of astrology, genetics, social, cultural, and economic factors. Cutolo was born with a Pluto dominance at the midheaven note, not at the ascendant, and this already presupposes a destiny of power and struggle, of violent passions. Then there is Mars in Aries, very powerful in the sector of work. One voice suggests he could have been a surgeon. No, that is not the martial inclination of this subject, and we must not forget the strong 2nd and 8th house axis, money, specifically other people's money. This strange mixture of bellicose tendencies and entrepreneurial inclinations gave birth to Raffaele Cutolo, who, by being born in Ottaviano, the town where a man's life is worth nothing, found fertile ground to express himself according to a leitmotif widely spread at the slopes of Vesuvius. Being born the son of a man to be respected certainly did not help him reverse course or perform a miracle of free will, a miracle we have never happened to observe. A very important role in this birth chart is played by Jupiter in the 8th house in a dissonant position. Regarding this, Elisa Morpurgo writes in her Lessons of Astrology, "Concerning corruption, let us remember the aforementioned common axis, that joins the second house to the eighth, namely money. The control of private selfishness translates immediately into the control of private assets, and then into the temptation to pass part of these assets into one's own pockets, thanks to a very scorpionic, or rather plutonic, administration of taxpayers' money. Could one be more explicit? Meanwhile, newcomers to our field might ask, how can a Sagittarius with Mercury in Sagittarius be a champion of evil, a standard bearer of a lifestyle against the law? The answer is twofold. First, one must never forget that every sign constellates a principle or its opposite, and in this case the reversal on the axis of justice is favored by the Sun, Mercury, and Jupiter opposition. Second, our subject is convinced he's acting rightly. Mine is true justice. I am destined to help people, to do good for my neighbor, to save many people. Thus he feels like a true musketeer, in the most genuine tradition of this sign. For our part, we can comment by noting that Mercury in Sagittarius opposite Jupiter does not give him sufficient critical sense to distinguish honor from murder. The moon in the 10th house and in Leo played an important part in the growth of this Mamma Santissima, who today commands it, is said an army of over 2,000 corporals, each with his own men. The moon is in fact an indicator of popularity and success, and Cutolo has plenty of both, since that distant day when he had the audacity to challenge Antonio Spavone, known as the Bad Man. Back then Cutolo was just a boy, but he was already aiming to stand out in Poggioreale, the high school of the underworld. Many years have passed. Cutolo has spent more than half his life in prison, and today the godson of Vito Genovese sows terror and despair. Of Sarah, a rival known as Cartridge, Cutolo said he was a man walking with his own corpse, and a month later he was found hanged in his cell. But this is not about premonition, even though Cutolo says, I know in advance the things that will happen. Within certain limits, this holds up, as Jupiter in the 8th can be an indicator of slight ESP faculties. Returning for a moment to the discussion of free will, we would like to note that, very probably, if Don Raphael had been born the son of a Wall Street banker, he could have been a god in the field of the stock market, especially through the mental elasticity that supports him in the field of morality. Today, however, he is what he is and must serve a lifetime in prison, a prison that, regardless, must not weigh heavily on him, again Jupiter in the 8th, given that his day is as full as that of a politician. He handles correspondence, considers requests for help, writes letters of recommendation, issues sentences, and so on. It seems that even the state needed him in the Cirillo case. The regional councillor of Campania kidnapped in April 1981 and released 3 months later. Cutolo is a leader, the recognized head of the Nuova Camorra Organizzata. To understand the importance, obviously in a negative sense, of this, suffice it to consider the Treccani Encyclopedia's entry for Camorra. Only the word remains to indicate abuses and arrogance. The professor, as he's often called, resurrected this ancient soul, and first from the rooms of his manor and then from his prison cell, he maneuvered the threads of an organization that became as powerful as the mafia. It often replaces the state, which is absent, by assigning jobs, granting pensions, and helping the families of prisoners. But all this is achieved through crime, imposing the law of terror on both the small and the great. From his native Ottaviano, his occult power extended throughout Campania, branching out elsewhere far beyond these limits. His escalation reached a critical moment when he decided to impose even a tax. This is the interpretation of experts following the criminal phenomenon on the crates of smuggled cigarettes unloaded in Naples. At that point, various Neapolitan clans allegedly united against the common enemy, giving rise to the new family, led by the Zazzas, the Bardellinos, and the Nuvolettas. Killings and cross-retaliations can no longer be counted. The Neapolitan hinterland is the Chicago of the 1930s. The news has made familiar names like Maritiello the Pretty, the Big Black One, the Monkey, the Lion, and the Animal, names both humorous and terrifying within a nomenclature of blood. Raffaele Cutolo, who is certainly not crazy, the perfect moon-Uranus square explains at most the subject's eccentricity, governs this ferocious war from prison, relying on his trusted sister, Donna Rosetta, celebrated in her brother's horoscope by an angular Venus in the third house, a very deep bond with a sister. But the same Venus in the third means something else in the boss's horoscope. It refers to a love for poetry. Many will remain incredulous, but Cutolo wrote a book called Poems and Thoughts, and won second prize in a poetry competition. He dedicated one poem to a child whose father and mother had been killed. Unfortunately, your parents were masters of infamous betrayals and slanders. Grow up beautiful, healthy, and different. Forget everything and everyone for a better life. Today, Cutolo lives in the high-security prison of Asinara, and the general conviction is that he continues his grim direction. His followers blindly obey his orders, and a single gesture from him could mean the end for a prisoner or a free man. But in the deadly war he has unleashed, he too runs enormous risks, as highlighted by journalist Sergio De Gregorio, who dedicated 2 books to him. Raffaele Cutolo has been sentenced to death by his enemies, and if the sentence has not yet been carried out, it is mainly due to the regime of high prison protection he enjoys. Nonetheless, Don Rafael runs very serious dangers in the short term. We say this especially for readers who intend to study this horoscope dynamically. His most critical period will be between 1985 and 1987, when Uranus and Saturn will transit over his natal Sun-Mercury conjunction, opposite Jupiter in the 8th house. But these dangers could also involve his Sun, given that at the same time Jupiter will transit through the natal 5th house. As we write this piece, it is a warm, late summer morning. Before us is the imposing figure of Vesuvius, beneath which millions of men live and work. One of them will die murdered today. A radio from the window opposite broadcasts the voice of Pino Daniele. I am crazy. The slaughter continues. Published in the 80s,